Absolutely. And I mean, you know, both players, no strangers to using this team. Paul Chua getting a second place in Baltimore Regionals, and then Agati winning Joinville Regionals. So both players super experienced with this team. Now, there are some notable differences between the team. First off, we got to talk about Agati's achievements. Joinville Regional Champion, very recent actually. So that, you know, just as we were talking about it, EUIC finalist, NAIC finalist, World's Top 16. An insanely stacked resume here. We're gonna look at the Pokemon overall. Amoonguss running that standard Spore, Rage Powder, Pollen Puff, Pierce Smog set with the Citrus Berry. We're gonna see the Incineroar running the usual Incineroar things. Choice Band Garchomp with Terra Steel. And we're gonna see a big thing I want to point out is the choice specs on the Ninetales is a really big deal here. Being able to output a bunch of damage, especially with that Terra Ice, and the King Gambit with access to Terra Flying, so you get Earthquake next to it with the Garchomp.
Yeah, a really cool team, and also really interesting that Dragonite is the only team on Agati's side that has Protect. Nothing else carries Protect. There's a Choice Band, a Choice Specs, an Assault Vest, the Safety Goals, and like this one. So, quite a hyper offensive team, not quite maybe relying more on defensive switches and just getting like offensive pressure off the bat rather than, protecting, trying to scout out what the opponent's going to do. So let's take a look at his opponent Portua's team, and I think we're going to see a very similar team. That Portugal, of course, the one who initially piloted this team to Baltimore Regionals in second place. And Portugal is also accolades, just a veteran of the game, Baltimore Regional finalist, EUIC champion, World Top 4, and 6-time regional champion. So Portugal, a really experienced player in this game, and having created this team, I think it's safe to say he knows exactly how to pilot this team.
Yeah, I mean, if you'll notice, 2023 EUIC champion and Agati was 2023 EUIC finalist. So maybe, Agati being able to come back in this match this week and be like, no, I'm going to win this time, right? So we are also going to see a couple of notable differences here between the teams, or at least, a couple. So first off, the Ninetales, it's running Blizzard, it's running Freeze Ray and Encore with the Focus Sash set. So it's giving itself a bit more flexibility. However, it will be outputting less damage. So it might be putting out a little bit less pressure onto something like the Amoonguss, onto something like the Dragonite, all right? And the King Gambit also Terra Dark, so you don't have the flexibility to Terra Flying next to your Earthquake. Maybe not wanting to do that anyways because of Ninetales' presence, but it is a nice option. That being said, Terra Dark Kowtow Cleave does hit pretty hard, so that is a pretty decent option as well coming out from the King Gambit.
Yeah, we've seen in the previous game, even though the King Gambit did not get boosted up by Swords Dance, just holding the Black Asses, he was able to do a lot of damage. So a Terra Dark King Gambit, even without any sort of boost, is going to be able to hit quite hard. And there's the Incineroar on the other side. I think both players are probably going to be quite careful with leading with that Incineroar just in case they give their opponent's King Gambit a bit of an attack boost. But we're going to go straight into the games. I think we're going to be ready, and this is going to be such an exciting way to end our Week 1 games.
Yeah, so we're going to see the leads come out here. We're going to see an Amoonguss Incineroar lead, a more flexible lead, but Ninetales King Gambit not only catching the Intimidate, but also having Snow Blizzard to even pressure the entire board. This is actually a really tricky position now for Paul. You do have the option of Fake Out and Spore, which is really nice. The King Gambit can't protect, and then Ninetales can't protect, which does show maybe a bit of the drawbacks of not being able to protect, but it is definitely a situation where King Gambit being boosted is pretty scary.
Yeah, Incineroar, of course, being part Dark typing, isn't going to mind too much. Of course, I think because this is a Assault Vest King Gambit, it does have low kick, so that is going to hurt quite a bit into this Amoonguss. And of course, I think Ninetales being the Choice Specs variant on Agati's side can protect, and it looks like the Ninetales is going to be one to take that Fake Out, so it's going to flinch, not going to be able to get any attacks.
Does it flinch?
Does get the flinch, and Amoonguss, of course, going to snack on its berry at first. So we're going to see if the Spore is going to come out successfully. But it looks like
it flinches!
Oh no, a very good turn for Agati here, just getting some free damage off onto this Amoonguss, and otherwise being able to prevent a Spore and one of his Pokemon getting put to sleep. Of course, King Gambit still, again, quite free to just dish out quite a lot of attacks, and Ninetales just free to start spamming Blizzards and maybe fish for a freeze.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on Paul's side, this isn't exactly where you want to be, right? Like, you wanted to get that Spore off, and now that you don't have the Spore off, this King Gambit just exerting so much pressure opting to switch out the Amoonguss here makes sense because you do want to preserve it for the Spore pressure. King Gambit coming in here, if something like a low kick has gone into that slot to cover for it, it could be really scary here. That being said, we are going to see the Kowtow Cleave come out into the King Gambit. Notably as well, the King Gambit outspeeding the Incineroar, implying that it might be pretty speedy.
Yeah, and King Gambit, of course, taking really heavy damage from that Flare Blitz. So, Incineroar, that's quite a good turn for Portugal, just switching in the King Gambit, not taking too much damage. Of course, it has been reduced, taken almost half, but I think this King Gambit, if it doesn't take a low kick, maybe if Portugal, it tries to play around, and I think the King Gambit on Portugal's side is Terra Dark, so it will still be taking super effective fighting type damage. So it's actually really, really close, despite, a bit of a disastrous turn 1 for Paul, and then not being able to get a Spore off. I think it's still a really, really even positioning on board.
Absolutely, and one thing to note is because Paul's King Gambit is the dark typing, if you opt to go for Blizzard and low kick into it, you are going to hit it regardless. But the low kick from Paul's coming out first, getting rid of King Gambit. Blizzard did not do much significant damage at all, and this could be a Flare Blitz or a parting shot going into Ninetales. It is a Flare Blitz.
Yeah, that Flare Blitz, I don't think the Ninetales is going to be able to solve. Oh, but it actually does that defense boost from ice types in the snow, just coming in really, really clutch here. So the Ninetales, knocked down to really low health and probably in Sucker Punch range, but now that Garchomp is going to come in and he's quite free to start spamming Earthquakes. So both the Incineroar and the King Gambit are going to be weak to it, and the King Gambit can't actually go, or if it terrestrializes, it'll still take damage because that's not a terrifying, that's Agati's King Gambit is the terrifying one.
Yeah, and one thing to note here is you could obviously just go for a Earthquake and switch in Dragonite. It's a very safe play, and Paul might even be hesitant to try and switch in that Dragonite if it did come on Paul's side, because you don't necessarily want to get caught by the Blizzard, right? If Dragonite's on the opposing side anyways, Garchomp probably doesn't want to come in either, so I feel like this Earthquake is very safe. The only thing that can really switch into it is Dragonite, and it might not want to do that in this situation. The real question is here is, do you throw a Sucker Punch into the Garchomp, and do you switch to Amoonguss so that way you can at least get a little bit of damage? Or are you switching to something like the Dragonite?
It looks like the Amoonguss is going to come in, nice and healthy, having regenerated all of its health. Sucker Punch coming in now, doing nice bit of chip damage. Of course, King Gambit also going to take some rough skin damage, but I think that King Gambit is going to get knocked down by the Earthquake from the Garchomp, and Amoonguss is going to take a fairly decent chunk of damage from that Earthquake. But Garchomp in quite a nice position just to start spamming Earthquake. Of course, I think we're going to see that Incineroar come back in just to renew the fake out pressure and drop that one stage of Intimidate.
Yeah, it is worth noting here too that it is a little bit awkward for Paul if Dragonite's not in the back, because you don't necessarily have a good switch into Earthquake. We are going to see Incineroar come in here, which does mean you are pressuring a Fake Out and Spore into the Garchomp. That is a really nice turn, but something Agati could even potentially try and consider is switching out the Garchomp so the Ninetales can take the Spore, and then maybe allowing yourself to play from there, trying to get rid of Amoonguss as quickly as possible. That being said, there are a couple of mind games here. If you choose to Fake Out Dragonite and call the switch and Spore into Ninetales, Dragonite's not getting value, it's getting its multi-scale broken, and then Paul has the option to reposition. So it really is going to come down to where this Fake Out goes, and does the Fake Out go into the Garchomp, stopping the Earthquake or not?
Yeah, we're going to see a terrestrialization now coming out from, I believe that is going to be Agati's side, so it is going to be that Dragonite going into the Terra Flying, so maybe trying to go for the Terra Blast, a super effective hit onto the Amoonguss, and it looks like actually Portugal is going to respond with his own terrestrialization, perhaps into the Amoonguss, just to remove that reduce that super effective hit from the flying type damage from the Dragonite.
Yeah, and I think here, the Terra Water obviously means that you can sit in front of that Terra Blast, like you said, and you can get a Spore off, which is a pretty safe way to approach the turn. Kind of implies that you don't really want this terrestrialization on your back Pokemon, or at least this was the best route forward for kind of guaranteeing you got some good value here. It is still going to do a good chunk of damage to Amoonguss, and it is going to be in range of another Terra Blast, which means it might want to be switching out the next turn, or you might want to try and kind of call where the Terra Blast is going. That being said, Garchomp is guaranteed to take a turn of sleep next turn, which does give Paul a little bit of breathing room here. You have to be careful, because if Ninetales comes in the right board state and it's able to put on enough pressure, it can kind of run over the rest of the game. So I'm very curious to see if Agati makes any attempts to bring in the Ninetales here, or if Agati just opts to go for a very safe Terra Blast to get some damage. But we haven't seen Paul's last Pokemon yet, so if it is the Garchomp, it could be potentially scary as long as you're able to play around that Ninetales.
Yeah, exactly. That Ninetales just waiting in the back to come back. and reset the health. Of course, Dragonite at full health with the multi-scale intact is really, really tanky. Of course, because it's multi-scale, it did get that -1 Intimidate drop, so its damage output is going to be quite reduced, and the Amoonguss heavily threatened is going to switch back out, and we're going to see Paul's final Pokemon, which is going to be that Ninetales. So a very, very nice switch in. Garchomp, of course, now taking its first mandatory turn of sleep, so we're going to see which target this Dragonite went for this Terra Blast. I don't think it's going to be enough to knock out either Pokemon. I think the Incineroar should... Oh, no, wait. Oh, my bad. The Incineroar is in the red. I thought it was in the orange for some reason. And that's going to be poured down to his final 2.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing here too, right, is the Ninetales being the Pokemon in the back. I wasn't too sure if that would be what the Pokemon in the back, because Garchomp obviously is really strong into the Kingambit, the Incineroar in the mirror, but Ninetales the perfect Pokemon to have in the endgame here, right? Ninetales can't really switch in too well into itself, considering it's on 30 HP, and then the Garchomp here is asleep, so this feels like a very safe board position for Paul to just keep the King Blizzard and Pollen Puff into your own Ninetales, just being able to consistently put out this big damage, and I don't know if Agati has any way to stop it.
Yeah, the Dragonite, of course, is switching out just wondering. Oh, Ninetales actually
able to live
at 3 HP. So leaves room for the Amoonguss to possibly maybe go for a Spore, maybe a Pollen Puff. It looks like a Pollen Puff, so Amoonguss may just try. Oh! A Pollen Puff onto itself, so potentially predicting maybe a Terra Blast onto that Ninetales and just wanting to keep that Focus Sash intact. And now Dragonite, of course, coming back. It is no longer intimidated, so its Terra Blasts are going to be dealing very heavy damage, and we're going to see whose Ninetales is going to be the faster fox.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing here as well that's going to be really important is if you're assuming your Ninetales is going to move faster, maybe you just go straight for the Freeze Dry, but we're going to see the opposing Ninetales move first, completely remove Agati's Ninetales from play, which means that this Dragonite might have a very big uphill battle to fight. We are going to see Terra Blast come out here, but I don't think it's enough.
Yeah, Terra Blast and Amoonguss managing to hang on, so Pollen Puffing, but once again onto this Ninetales, which does absolutely nothing for them now because the Ninetales is still at full health, but Dragonite's multi-scale has been broken, so it will be taking super effective damage from this Ninetales, and you know, Ninetales has the Focus Sash, so Dragonite is going to be forced to take 2 turns to hit it, to just be able to knock it out, and there's also this Amoonguss on the field just being able to be very, very annoying with the Rage Powder pressure.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to note here too is because Paul's Ninetales is not Specs locked, Agati doesn't even have the out of going for a Protect and then potentially trying to stall out Snow so Blizzard can miss, right? That being said, it probably would have done more damage anyways and won the game before that. Because, I mean, you're just going to see it absolutely shreds the Dragonite here. But this was a really interesting game. I felt like Paul did a little bit better job of navigating the board, being able to set up that Ninetales endgame. And I think Paul having the flexibility to change his moves in the late stages of the game were really significant for just kind of guaranteeing he could win the game.
Yeah, he positioned that Ninetales really, really well as well, just bringing out at the final turn once the Terra Flying had been used up on that Dragonite, which meant that the 2 dragons sitting on the field were both going to be heavily threatened by a Blizzard from that Dragonite, the Ninetales. So, you know, really nice positioning and Paul just keeping that up in the back. And we were wondering at one stage, you know, is it going to be that Dragonite at the back? It could switch into the Earthquake from a Choice Band Garchomp, which would be nice, but you know, Ninetales showing why it's such a good Pokemon in this format with all these dragons running around.
Yeah, I mean, another question here too is, are we about to see a mirror lead? I mean, the Incineroar and Amoonguss look so convincing there, and the Ninetales and Kingambit are objectively Pokemon you want to bring into this matchup. So are we going to see them opt for similar brings, or are we going to see an adjustment maybe from Agati, trying to do a different lead that doesn't force the mirror, but also kind of giving yourself a bit of an advantage? I could maybe see something like Incineroar and Ninetales coming out as well, so you have some pressure with Fake Out and Freeze Dry or Fake Out and Blizzard. But it's definitely a circumstance where, because it's the nature of a mirror, you might just have lost to something and be like, well, now I want to do that because it seems good, you know, and then play the game from there.
Yeah, it's gonna be really cool. So let's jump into our game 2 and see how our players have adjusted to the games and whether or not they're going to switch up their leads.
Okay, I mean, we are going to see the Incineroar and Kingambit come out versus the Ninetales and Kingambit. So we know that Paul's Kingambit is faster, so maybe wanting to leverage that from the start, saying, even if you get a boost, it's okay. I am going to be pressuring you with low kick. Now, one thing to note here, Agati's King Gambit does have Terra Flying, but maybe Paul is trying to bait that Terra Flying out, so Ninetales is in an even better position to sweep late game.
Yeah, exactly. That King Gambit once again has been intimidated and has got that tough boost, but sitting on the field against two dark types, it can go for the low kick, which is going to be super effective against either Pokemon if he picks the correct target. And if actually the King Gambit on Chua's side is Terra Dark, so it can't actually Terastallize out of that weakness. But if it goes for that Terra Dark, it won't get knocked down by him. But I think at this stage it might be way too early for these players to go for that Terra. And we see King Gambit actually retreating, so Agati choosing to give up those boosts and let that Dragonite come in.
Yeah, really scary thing here is does fake out an Iron Head come out, because that would be able to knock out the Ninetales. We're gonna see Blizzard come out here for very minimal chip, but if Iron Head is coming out, it would be really good here. But low kick is gonna go into the Dragonite, doing some decent damage. Ninetales could have gotten punished really hard for that turn, and now Dragonite does have a bit of pressure with low kick itself.
That was an amazing switching from Agati's side, identifying that his +1 King Gambit was such a big threat to poor Chua's Pokemon that he would have no choice but to really try and target down this King Gambit, which of course being Assault Vest meant that it couldn't actually protect. So that Dragonite switching in, of course it's now got its multi-scale broken, but it's in a quite nice position. It also has access to low kick, which is going to be super effective against either team. And that King Gambit also heavily threatened and is going to withdraw. So now it looks like the Ninetales is going to be free to fire off another Blizzard. We're going to see, are we going to see any freezes coming up? Of course, Incineroar having Flare Blitz.
Wow. Yeah, the crit did so much damage there. And the low kick coming out into the Incineroar. I mean, Agati from a position that looked maybe not as great because of the boosted King Gambit, by Paul switching it out here, playing a bit more conservative, did take a lot of damage for this turn. You do get the benefits of being able to reposition here, and you are maybe putting on a bit more pressure now because you have Ninetales in safely. You can go for Blizzard. Dragonite doesn't really want to burn its Flying Terror here, and you have low kick as well. So it is not a terrible situation here, but I feel like if Paul gets one more turn wrong here, it could easily spiral out of control, and Agati can gain a lot more of an advantage here.
Yeah, it's really, really close here. I think if either player makes just a slight mistake that the other player capitalizes on, it's going to be really, really impactful. Dragonite, not really in the best position. It's at -1 attack, it's had some multi-scale broken, so heavily threatened by the Ninetales on Chua's side, and the King Gambit, of course, now quite free. It's not really that heavily threatened at the moment because the Ninetales can just fire off a Blizzard, so it is quite safe from any fighting type attacks. And we see that Ninetales actually on Agati's side just going to retreat.
Yeah, this is really scary. If low kick comes out here and Paul makes the prediction that one of the dark types were coming in, Incineroar hadn't been revealed yet, so you might not know that it's in the back, but King Gambit did definitely have the opportunity to come out here. Agati, instead of opting for something like a protect maybe and switch, he just opted to double switch here. So if low kick came out in combination with Blizzard into the Dragonite slide, would have been really good, but Sucker Punch comes out. It does not activate, and Blizzard comes out here for a little bit of chip, but that's probably the best way the turn could have gone for Agati.
That critical hit.
Oh
no! Got the freeze! Oh, that is so unfortunate for Agati, because that was otherwise a really, really fantastic switch, and both Pokemon just taking very, very minimal damage, but that freeze is really, really impactful because now this King Gambit on Agati's side, unless it thaws out, it's not going to be able to threaten the opposing King Gambit with a low kick, and it's all down to this Incineroar. And maybe one thing I'm wondering, is Agati maybe good try to Flare Blitz his own King Gambit to try and thaw it out? But I think that might be taking just a little bit too much damage on himself. I think the Incineroar is probably going to try and get rid of this Ninetales so that maybe the Dragonite can come in a bit later on and threaten the King Gambit again with the low kicks.
And we're going to see the fake out come out here. So, actually I want to bring attention to the play that you had mentioned, potentially Flare Blitzing your own King Gambit, because I thought about that as well. If you go for a Flare Blitz into your own King Gambit, Terra Flying it, and go for a low kick. Oh, it does thaw though, and it gets a low kick off as well. So didn't even need the Flare Blitz yourself in that instance, actually. Just being able to do a ton of damage and just get rid of that King Gambit. That is a huge knockout for Agati. Now you are up in the game a little bit. You do force the Incineroar back in or the Dragonite back in, which is good here. And now you're able to really leverage this Incineroar as well. It's super scary, I think, into Paul's team if you're able to position it properly.
Yeah, this Incineroar's in a really nice position. The Ninetales doesn't really threaten it, and even if it does get the freeze, Incineroar can just flip itself out of that freeze. And that King Gambit really coming in clutch for Agati. They're just throwing out without taking a single turn. So, not really an impactful freeze. King Gambit, of course, now is quite heavily threatened by that Dragonite. It's probably not going to want to go for a Terra flying in the face of this Ninetales. So maybe we might see a retreating, or we might maybe just trying to see Agati trying to stay on top of the game, putting on that pressure onto Portua's side now that the Kingdom has been knocked down. We actually see the terrestrialization. Is that from Agati's side? I think that is. Oh no, that's for Paul's side.
From Paul's side, yeah, on the Dragonite. I mean, the thing is here is that realistically, Paul is a pretty safe play with Blizzard and low kick here, or potentially going for an attack. Agati going for Sucker Punch here. I think what Agati's idea is here is that you're going to be basically putting yourself in a situation where you at least have broken the Dragonite's multi-scale. You can potentially reposition. Terra Blast now, though, coming into the Incineroar. Is it able to hold on? It should be. It is.
Yeah, Incineroar now answering back with a Flare Blitz, and that's going to be enough to take out this Ninetales, but Ninetales has been quite disruptive and locking in the King Gambit into the Sucker Punch. So now Chua knows exactly what that King Gambit is going to do, and with that, I believe there was there an Among... Have we seen the Among Us in the back? Oh no, we saw an Incineroar. I don't think we've seen the Among Us. But yeah, Incineroar now coming back, but of course King Gambit locked into Sucker Punch. It is going to be forced. It's not the worst move to be locked into at the moment, I think. I think Sucker Punch actually from this range can knock out Paul's Incineroar, so it's going to be quite interesting how the next turns play out.
I mean, the next thing here that you can really do is just go for a fake out and a low kick into the opposing King Gambit, but Paul canceling from here. I think the reasoning for this is, realistically in this scenario, Agati just has so much momentum. You have the boosted King Gambit, it forces a double up. That means Incineroar is able to just go for a parting shot, reposition, Ninetales comes back in. Game's basically over, right? So I'm sure Paul can see that sequence, and that's kind of what Agati was playing for. So I think one thing that was really interesting about this game was, even though the freeze came out on the Agati's King Gambit, the fact that it thawed immediately obviously just let it exert a lot of pressure. And I think maybe Paul was playing as if the King Gambit wasn't going to thaw on that turn, right? As well, too, I think a really big deal was the Incineroar being able to hang on in that situation, almost guaranteed lock the game. It was already a great situation anyways for Agati, but with Incineroar hanging on there from the Flare Blitz, it just meant that now you can just intimidate cycle for the rest of the game.
Yeah, that was really well played, and I think I accidentally called out some Among Us imaginary Among Us that didn't exist in that game, so my mistake there. But we're gonna go into our game 3 and see how both our veteran players are going to adjust to this really close and exciting set.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna see the Ninetales and King Gambit lead, but Garchomp and Among Us as the adjustment. So this is a really interesting situation. The thing is you can't even click Earthquake, which is one of the main moves you'd probably want to use here, and you would probably rather commit your terrestrialization to Among Us here so that you can go for a Spore safely into King Gambit. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the turn plays out here. I think realistically, here you want to get a Spore into one of these Pokemon. Maybe you're going to try and switch here, but I don't know if Garchomp was the right bring in this lead situation, considering Ninetales was there to match it.
Yeah, maybe Agati was predicting something like an Among Us and Incineroar and King Gambit, having that Garchomp there to just pressure with Choice Band. But of course, now the Ninetales is looking really comfortable in front of 2.1 that Sweep to Ice. But King Gambit is actually going to switch out, so it looks like that's going to be the Incineroar coming back in. So, going to be immune to any spores, and also just going to drop one stage of attack onto that Garchomp. So just reducing the how heavy that Garchomp is going to hit, and we're going to see a turn 1 terrestrialization coming off from this Garchomp.
Yeah, I mean, I think a really big thing here that's going to come into play is because of the Terra Steel, you're obviously able to sit in front of the Blizzard from Ninetales, and Paul taking a more conservative approach to the turn, switching out the King Gambit into the Incineroar to get that Intimidate down. You are getting a bunch of damage down on this Among Us, which is good, but this is going to leave Agati open to throw a Spore into the Ninetales, which was selected, and go for a Stomping Tantrum. So this is a lot of value Paul is trading on turn 1.
Oh wow, that Incineroar took so much damage, and Intimidate coming in really clutch, but now this Ninetales has been put to sleep, which means the Among Us is quite free to start. Of course, it doesn't want to. It's not going to affect the Incineroar, but the Garchomp is just in such a good position now in the Terra Steel. It will be able to knock out this Incineroar in one hit with the Stomping Tantrum or Earthquake if that Incineroar does not go for the fake out. And I'm not sure if Agati has Dragonite in the back, but it's something that maybe later on you could switch out the Garchomp and switch back in and just start spamming Earthquakes. But it looks like actually the Incineroar is just gonna retreat for now, maybe wanting to drop another stage of attack onto this Garchomp later on.
Oh, we're gonna see the Garchomp come out, which this is actually very, very good if you're on Paul's side, because even though you do have to take some damage on this Garchomp has made itself susceptible to Earthquake. So now you have to respect from Agati's side, is this Earthquake gonna be coming out and putting consistent pressure on as well too? Paul's Ninetales does have access to Blizzard, so if you use Blizzard Earthquake, it is very, very hard for Agati to switch into this attack. It is worth noting though, Ninetales can still sleep, and if the opposing Ninetales from Agati's side gets in for free here and is then able to reposition, it can also exert a lot of pressure. That being said, Paul has not used Terrestrialization yet. Terrestrialization being used on his Garchomp as well. Once he gets rid of Agati's Garchomp means it will do really well into the opposing Ninetales.
Yeah, I think at this point, Paul probably does not want to go for the Earthquake onto his own Ninetales and take really, really heavy damage. So maybe he might want to think about locking into a different move. And the Among Us is in quite a nice position to maybe go for another small to that Garchomp if that doesn't switch out. But it looks like Garchomp just really heavily threatened on Agati's side. It's going to switch in for the Ninetales, and Among Us actually going to see a double switch. So it's going to be the Incineroar, so also dropping down another stage of attack onto that Garchomp and just reducing the damage of its moves.
Yeah, if Earthquake comes out here, it would do quite a bit of damage. If Stomping Tantrum also comes out into Incineroar, it can also get a bunch of chip. We are going to see Stomping Tantrum goes into the Ninetales here. It's not doing as much as you'd probably prefer. I believe Agati's looks like it's a little bit bulkier, especially because it undersped Paul's Ninetales, and because Paul is running Sash, it's most likely trained to just be as fast as possible and hit as hard as possible. Whereas Agati has a bit more flexibility because of this choice specs. Now, this being said, Agati does have a really good turn here. You can just go for a Blizzard, put immediate pressure down. You have fake out pressure and you have flare blitz pressure. So I do think it is on Paul here to reposition a little bit, especially because the stomping did not catch the instant.
Yeah, Garchomp is so heavily threatened, it is going to withdraw, and I think Incineroar is probably going to be a nice. Oh, actually, no, King Gambit also is just going to switch in. So this Paul going for the Ninetales actually waking up, going for the Protect, just keeping itself safe from maybe a potential Flare Blitz or a Faker. But Blizzard now coming in. Are we going to see a freeze? I don't think it's going to do very much to this King Gambit. We're going to see what the Incineroar is going to do as a follow-up.
Yep, and Flare Blitz goes into that Ninetales, which means that King Gambit got in pretty safely. I feel like we've watched many turns between these players where they just trade switching in their Pokemon perfectly, where no damage comes out in board states where it really does look good for each player, right? So again, Paul just being able to make an excellent switch here, getting in the King Gambit for free, and now you're pressuring a really strong low kick into Incineroar or an Iron Head into Ninetales. And at this point, it might be harder for Agati to switch into that Iron Head. You are obviously Terra Steel Garchomp, but you are going to be taking chip that's going to build up over time, maybe putting it in Sucker Punch range next turn.
Yeah, we're going to see another switch out, and it is going to be that Incineroar coming back in. So, reducing the damage of the Agati's Incineroar. I think it's really interesting that our players have brought the exact same 4 Pokemon for this game. So just recognizing that these are the best 4 Pokemon in the case of a mirror match. Of course, because the Ninetales switched out second, the Garchomp is going to be able to switch in without taking an attack field, and it actually takes the Iron Head really well. I think the King Gambit actually did more damage to itself from that rough skin, but the
was that a crit?
It must
it's
be.
A crit.
Because, that is a very unfortunate crit for Paul. Otherwise, he would have survived because that Incineroar was at -1. So quite a huge knockout, and actually one of the pieces has fallen for Paul because now he's lost a switch option in that King Gambit, which was a really key resistance for his team.
It is worth noting, though, it did let the Garchomp in for free, and now this Garchomp is threatening quite a bit of damage. Even though, obviously, you would prefer it to not happen that way, you are still threatening interesting board state, right? You don't necessarily want to be in the situation if you're Agati in front of a Pokemon that can Earthquake and hit both. That being said, though, because of Paul losing his King Gambit, it really does cut down on the resources he has. And if you're using Earthquake, you have to hit yourself, right? You either knock out your own Incineroar, switch in Ninetales, hope it survives, and you might not be able to do that at this point because of the lack of bulk on the Sash Ninetales. So maybe having to go for something a bit more safe.
Yeah, it looks like Paul's going to withdraw that Incineroar, and I think that's an Among. No, that's the Ninetales coming back in. So wanting to reset that Snow, maybe get some Blizzard boost or some Moonblast coming in, but that Garchomp is just in such a good position on Guardi's side. But Among Us also just switching in. Oh, the Earthquake coming.
Oh,
Oh,
hangs
very
on
good.
though.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I mean, this is just so. I mean, the fact that the Chomp moved faster from Agati just means not only that, but Garchomp switched out, right? Or it didn't switch out. So the Stomping Tantrum into the Amoonguss now. Amoonguss just has a very safe Rage Powder and Earthquake here. I mean, not necessarily actually, because technically you have access to Blizzard and Stomping Tantrum. But if Agati's Garchomp just goes first here, it's not good for Paul. So do you risk the speed tie or do you try to position around this? I do think this might be a situation in which, because of the lack of Paul's resources, you do take the gamble and you do go for that Earthquake.
yeah, that Blizzard is going to come off its first, so we're going to see Among Us get knocked out. Are we going to see a freeze on this Garchomp? Because that would be quite critical. But it looks like there's going to be no freeze, so whose Garchomp is going to go first? And it is going to be Paul's Garchomp, and it is going to go first. Knockout Agati's Garchomp, and someone's going.
Oh, but the rough skin!
Live rough skin recoil. So all of a sudden, we've gone from both players having quite a few Pokemon resources to be knocked down to their final two Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean, this is just such a tricky situation for Paul, right? We saw, obviously, that King Gambit going down to the crit there was just so bad, and it's a Ninetales versus Incineroar, but someone has significantly more chipped Pokemon, right? And I think Paul won't be able to bring it out here. I mean, there are some potential plays maybe that can bring it back, but I just don't see a way out unless Agati makes a serious mistake here, maybe opting to lock into Fake Out and then getting Encored. But besides that, it's just a situation in which, because of how healthy Incineroar is on Agati's side, it should be able to close out the game.
Yeah, it's just such a safe Fake Out and Blizzard, or I think we just saw Agati just lock into the Flare Blizz, not even bothering to go for the Fake Out, because knowing that the Incineroar just really easily walls Paul's side, and actually we're gonna see the Fake come off on Blizzard. Yeah, maybe Paul trying to
Does it
push
freeze?
for
Oh wait, doesn't matter.
can't freeze the Ice type, and the
Yeah.
Flare Blizz doesn't care. So it looks like Agati is going to finally wither down all his opponent's Pokemon. It's going to be that very low health Incineroar against a very healthy Incineroar and a fairly healthy Ninetales.
Yeah, I mean, in that game, right? Like, I feel like once Paul had to take a lot of damage on the Incineroar, you had to be really careful from there. You couldn't afford to let